Let's go.
Welcome to Citizen. We got a special guest today from Newsnation, Leland Vittert. Best hair in news, is that right? Or is that still the case? When's the last time they had a vote on this shit?
The last vote was from, I think, 2008 in Denver, Colorado. And then that stays with me forever, which it has. However, I've not been put up for best beard in podcasting.
Oh, well, there's a lot of those, unfortunately. There's a lot of people that look like me doing this stuff with mixed results, but that's fine. I don't mind being confused with other people. Let's start from the beginning. Where'd you grow up?
Grew up in St. Louis, Missouri.
Oh, nice. How'd you like it there?
Well, Born Lucky is the story of sort of the worst parts of my life growing up. So there's not much I liked about St. Louis other than some places with some good food, is at least growing up there. You know, Born Lucky is this story of hope for every parent of a kid who's having a hard time. I clearly had a very hard time. And I think St. Louis was probably the place that I hold most responsible for those memories.
Is that fair to hold St. Louis responsible, or is it just a coincidence?
Oh, I don't know. I guess I don't hold the city responsible. I think, growing up, I had, some real problems. And, I think about it in seventh grade at this new school I was going to. In Born Lucky, my parents have all these hopes because they've had to pull me out of three different schools through elementary school because I was having such a hard time getting bullied so badly. So they take me to this new school, seventh grade. They get called in 2 weeks in. They're all hopeful that, this is going to be a new start, a new beginning. And they get sat down in the principal's office and are told by the principal, everybody at this school thinks Lucky, that was my nickname, is quite weird. And then she followed up and said, and I do too. So any parent can imagine what that's like. St. Louis is a pretty provincial town. It's sad, and this is probably a commentary for a different time, but you think about in the 1980s, St. Louis had the number 3, it was ranked 3rd on the list of Fortune 500 headquarters. Went New York, Chicago, St. Louis.
Budweiser's one, obviously.
Oh, yeah, and Anheuser-Busch, Monsanto, Pet, TWA, General Dynamics, Ralston Purina, Boatman's Bank. I could keep going down the list. Mallinckrodt, all these great companies. And St. Louis has really fallen on very, very hard times. McDonnell Douglas, because of the mismanagement in the city. But as I said, for a different time.
Well, I mean, we got some time here, but we'll get to all that. So you had, let's call it, I think, well, these days in 2025, the word autism is used in the same way that literally is used, I think, right? Which is to say not appropriately most of the time, or certainly not to diagnose any real condition, just to, like, I'm socially awkward, so I probably have autism. But there is a real condition, obviously. I guess celiac disease is another good example of that, where people just kind of self-diagnose. But I know you had some speech issues and stuff like that. What other kind of stuff were you struggling with?
Well, so when I was about 5 or 6 years old, my parents were told they needed to have me evaluated. So I had terrible behavioral problems. If somebody would touch me in line at school or something like that, I'd turn around and slug them. Recess or birthday parties or play dates or anything like that was totally out of the question. I had really terrible sensory issues. So, if I had socks on I didn't like, or a jacket or a shirt or whatever, I would just sort of melt down. My parents were told that they needed to have me evaluated, so they took me to one of those medical testing buildings with the linoleum floors and the stale coffee and bad magazines. In Born Lucky, you're there as they bring me back after a couple of hours of testing, and the woman sits my parents down and says, he's got a number of issues. He also has severe learning disabilities. His IQ test, which is the average of two halves, shows a 70-point spread between the two halves. A learning disability is 20 points spread. They said, we've never seen a spread this big. So I was sort of half genius and half mentally retarded. My wife would argue that they got the genius part wrong, but that's a different issue. She said to my parents, we've never seen a spread this big, and then followed up to my parents by saying, you need to understand, we don't really understand. She said it's very difficult to understand what's going on inside his head. And that was where we were. And I was diagnosed with a number of different issues, all of which now fall under, from a diagnosis standpoint, the autism spectrum.
Did you understand what was going on inside your head? Because I've got some personal experience with this as well. I'm curious what your experience was like.
I always understood that something was very different in how I saw the world, and my parents were very clear about that. My dad would say, I need to teach you how to understand emotion and understand social interaction in the way that everyone else does. Born Lucky is the story of my dad working to adapt me to the world, not the world to me. And that's obviously very different than in many parenting situations now. So Born Lucky was his attempt to sort of mold me so I could have as productive of a life and to fulfill whatever potential I had.
Yeah, I think Greg Lukianoff and Jonathan Haidt would have appreciated that approach, considering. I don't know if you've read Coddling the American Mind, but that's one of the things they talk about is to prepare your children for the road, not the road for your children, as you can't really do the second.
Yeah, my dad's idea was, right, you're going to go through hell. He knew that. He understood I wouldn't have any friends. He understood I would be bullied. He understood the teachers would get in on it, all that kind of stuff. So he decided, as he said, I knew that me being there for you was your only chance. And effectively, this is the story of him holding my hand through the adversity, right? Walking the road with me rather than trying to take the adversity away.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, I remember having some of these issues when I was younger. And I'm not sure, like I definitely understood something was going on, but I didn't know what it was.
Yeah.
Hard to put. I mean, I guess without context, being a young kid, you don't really know what the hell you're talking
Yeah,
about.
look, I understood the bullying. I understood the isolation. I understood that if I tried to interact with kids, they would find me repellent, almost like a magnet. I understood that in fifth grade, my dad showed up, and in Born Lucky, my dad, has these glimmers of hope. So he goes to the school that I'm at in fifth grade, and he comes to see me and goes to the PE fields where I was, I guess, in PE class, and asked the PE teacher, how's Lucky doing? And the PE teacher goes, well, I think he's doing better today. And dad goes, great, let's go see him. And the PE teacher says, I don't think that's a good idea. My dad says, why? He says, I've had to put him with the girls for the past month because he was getting bullied so badly. So I understood that I was different and things were awful. My sister, when I asked her what my first memory or her first memory of me is, in fifth grade, same place, I ended up having to get taken out of school. But, I would walk down from fifth grade to her kindergarten classroom to take her home every day. We would walk home through the woods. And I asked her what her first memory was. And she said, you pick me up at kindergarten class. We'd walk out through the back door of the school, back through the PE fields to the woods that led to our house. And you'd start crying every day when you got to the woods.
Yeah.
So I certainly understood things were bad.
Yeah, I remember my personal experience was doing, like, my main motivation at the time was just to fly under the radar as much as possible. And what I found myself doing was kind of mimicking anybody, like everybody else around me. I'll tell you, downstream, especially today, my lady is not. She likes it sometimes and doesn't like it sometimes. That I can read her like instantly, her moods and stuff like that. I'm like, just tell me what's wrong. No need for, and I'm like, no need for all the stuff, the faces or whatever. You can just tell me. And she's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, you're something clearly wrong. Just tell me. So it's like, this is something that is not necessarily unique to any particular condition or circumstance. For human beings, we adapt really well, and the process of adaptation will typically, if you approach it the correct way, make you extremely good at something or a few things that other people just can't do. And, I think to your point from before about giving power to the parents who don't really understand what power they have, that's the power you have. It's almost like, it's almost like a superpower to some degree where you can, this whole thing where if you go blind, your hearing gets better is nonsense. Obviously, that's not how life works. But going through adversity, especially social stuff, you learn tips and tricks and such that people just don't. There's no way to do it organically or inorganically. Excuse me.
Yeah, I think that's true, and I certainly have learned the skill of social interaction and trying to pick up on emotional cues and those really subtle things. I think what I might say is the difference. And Born Lucky is not a cure to autism. It's not a prescription. It's just my story. And at the end, I equate autism to almost alcoholism, that it's something you have to deal with every day. I still deal with it. A couple of months ago, I was playing golf with my father-in-law, and we're finishing up a round of golf. We played this with this other twosome, and I am late. So I start packing my golf bag next to the golf carts when we finish. And if you know anything about autism, it's very easy to become really hyper task focused. That's a kind of classic sign of autism. So I'm trying to pack the golf bag and I'm really focused on it. And one of the gentlemen who we played golf with walked over to say hello to me and wanted to talk about things. So he's standing over me, goes, "Hey, Leland." Hi. Didn't even look up, didn't talk to him. I'm packing the golf bag. And he's trying to talk to me. It was just so phenomenally rude how I was acting. I couldn't help myself. I was right back to being an 8-year-old who couldn't make eye contact, who couldn't understand and stop the obsessive behavior on the golf bag. So he just eventually walked away because I was so rude to him. And I sent him a text later, found his phone number and sent him a text and said, I just want to apologize for how rude I was. It's really unacceptable, wrong. I'm better than that. I really apologize. What I didn't say is, oh, by the way, I have autism, right? The one thing that my parents never wanted me to do was use it as an excuse, see myself as a victim. And it's why they didn't tell me about it until I was in my 20s. It's why I never got any kind of accommodations or extra time on tests or behavior modification plans or any of that stuff. It just was me in the world. But they never wanted me to be able to use it as a crutch.
I mean, it's not useful, to be honest. To think of yourself as a victim.
Well, victimhood's a drug, right?
Yeah.
It's like fentanyl.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a drug, but it's also a social currency now, which is very unfortunate for society. Our social currencies used to be respectability and honor and things like that, right? Like for dudes, joining some new group, whether it's work, new friends, or getting introduced to people, there's this checklist of questions that we use because we're pattern-seeking animals to see if this guy is legit, if he's safe to be around, and so on and so forth. And the things are like, is he a good man? Is he a good husband, father? Is he dependable? Is he reliable? All this stuff. And now, I'm not sure what the checklist, the internal, checklist looks like for people anymore. But it does seem like there's an element of like this postmodernist victimhood that's woven into the fabric of our social currency now, and it's become very problematic for people, because it doesn't do you any favors. Forget about the negative impact it has on society at large, but it doesn't do the individual any favors either.
I think that's true.
Just don't see I don't see the point of it. I wonder. There's a lot of stuff in the book about your dad kind of being very intentional about not shielding you from stuff, but instead trying to like toughen you up and prepare you for stuff. There's one anecdote about making you do push-ups and shit like that.
Yep.
And this, learning how to protect yourself, which is, certainly, I mean, look, I was in the infantry, so that's definitely speaks to me. Not the push-ups part, those suck, but learning how to protect yourself is definitely something that all young men should know how to do.
Yeah, it cut both ways. The school I went to didn't particularly appreciate that. I turned myself into a pretty strong little kid and eventually did protect myself against one of the bullies. And the school went nuts. And my dad, who knew the headmaster, after the story was there was this kid who just kept pushing me around and harassing me and making fun of me and making fun of me and making fun of me. And finally, I kept asking my dad, like, can I finally hit this guy? My dad's dad was a fighter. My dad, when he started in 7th grade at the same school I went to, his dad said to him, he said, Mark, I want you to go find the biggest kid in your class on the first day of school. So this is understand where my life came from. The biggest kid, and you go up to him in the hallway. So my grandfather's talking to my dad, and you bump into him. And when he turns around after you bump into him, you slug him in the face and lay him on the ground. And when he's on the ground, you lean over him and you say, "You don't ever touch me again." That was my grandfather's way of dealing with things. And my dad didn't do that. My dad's a very kind-hearted man and gentle. And he came home after his first day of school, and my grandfather says, "Did you do it? Did you hit him?" And my dad goes, "No." And my grandfather was not a man to not follow direction from. My dad is thinking about why not, why not, why not. And my grandfather goes, "Well, why didn't you?" And my dad says, "Well, because I was the biggest one there." So that was how my dad got out of it. But I had this kid who was bullying me and picking on me, and I took him in. My dad said, "Don't hit him, but take him and slam his head down on the desk and pull his arm behind behind him, put him in a hold, and say, if you ever do this again, I'm gonna pop you." Which I did, and then I got in trouble and everything else. And the principal says the headmaster says to my dad, "Where did Lucky get the idea to do this?" And my dad said, "Well, I told him to." And the guy goes, "You can't do that. You can't, be physical with a kid." And my dad goes, "Well, what do you want him to do? You're not protecting him." So he had to protect himself, which, creates, now it creates all these problems that you can't deal with in the same way.
Yeah, I mean, I've got a lot of things to say about that. One, you're describing how high trust societies crumble, right? When individuals lose a sense of safety and security, they tend to take things into their own hands. And generally speaking, meting out justice from the bottom up doesn't tend to go too well because it's chaotic. You know what I mean? I mean, certainly like little measures here and there, guardrails to keep everybody in line. The fact, if you know that there's a line you can cross where a dude's going to punch you in your face, that's not a bad thing, frankly, right?
No, I write in Born Lucky, right, about how then it was made so clear that I couldn't touch anybody. It just made me even more of a target, right? Because I couldn't stand up for myself. I couldn't, and the bullies knew that, right? Because they knew that I had been, told that if I punched a kid, I was going to be thrown out of school. So that created its own problems.
So you're saying that we shouldn't defund the police then?
The one thing about this book that I think has been really great is that I have done TV appearances from Steve Bannon to Joe Scarborough. And every one of them have been totally apolitical. And the other part about it is that both Bannon and Scarborough teared up. So find something in our society that gets both Joe Scarborough and Steve Bannon to agree is great and to tear up, which is what Born Lucky has because of the message of hope and power for parents. Beyond anything else, I'll let you take from my story what you will, or
Sure.
anybody take from my story what you will.
Have you ever read the book Ender's Game or the
Nope.
series? All right, I was curious. There's a story in there. One of the foundational stories actually is a young kid that's getting bullied, and one of the ways that I guess the leaders measure his capability is the fact that he wants to end the threat permanently without doing too much damage, I guess, right? Like obviously there's an element of self-preservation, but to your dad's point, I guess, or to his credit, even if it was a way to escape having to do what he should have done or what his dad wanted him to do rather, still if you're the strongest, there's some conferred responsibility there as well. Right, not to abuse your power. I think that's a good lesson. Is there a specific moment from your childhood where all the bullying and stuff felt overwhelming for you? Like, obviously, there's going to be different moments.
Yeah, I mean, I think every day, and that's really what this story is, right? Is that my dad, in the words of my mom and my dad, they said, that every day you would go off to battle, is how they described it, which was school for me, and every night you would come home and we would have to put you back together. So yeah, I mean, it was a daily struggle, really, probably from about third grade to certainly until the senior year in high school.
Is your dad still alive?
You're nice to ask. He is, and really the reason I wanted to write Born Lucky now, in addition to the giving hope part to so many families and the hope that my parents didn't have, was that so he would understand that I understood the sacrifice. He never talked about any of this stuff. I never went to therapy. There was never, we never sort of dealt with this as a family in a modern sense of talking about it. So, he would be in my room for a couple of hours every night as I would sort of unload emotionally of everything that had been done to me in the the bullying and the cruelty and the emotional torture and everything else every day. And I didn't know till we wrote the book and I interviewed my mom that he would oftentimes come down outside of my room, come downstairs, and he would be in the living room, 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, just sitting there in the dark crying because of what he was going through too. And I think the most important part of the book really is my dad's afterword to it, which is his thoughts for families, for every family with a kid having a really hard time.
Yeah, I mean, there's it's a pretty compelling story. You know, the sacrifice that your dad made for you is
Yep.
that's not something that most people get. I don't think anymore or ever maybe. I don't know. I mean, it's a pretty extraordinary story. I certainly didn't have that in my
Yeah.
life. It was quite a
Yeah. No,
bit the
my
opposite.
dad, my dad sacrificed an enormous amount, sold his companies. And then he was around all the time. He didn't really play golf on the weekends. He didn't, go travel with his friends. He didn't go out to dinner a lot of nights. I mean, he was there. He said he knew that my only chance was him being there. And I asked him as we were writing this book, well, what would you have done if you couldn't have sold companies, right? If
Mm.
you had to work every day? And he said simple, he said, I would have worked the night shift. He said, I knew that I was your only chance. He said, I didn't know how it was going to end up. And obviously, I think at least he's told me he's very proud about how it ended up.
Mm.
But he said, I knew your only chance was me being there. And, for 10 or 15 years, 10, 12 years, he was really my only friend. When you think about that, he was all I had. And he knew that. And he lived up to that in every sense of the word.
Yeah, I mean, have you asked him what resources? I mean, I'm curious. Have you guys had like a frank conversation about what it was like for him?
Yeah, we've had a lot of conversations about it. He says how scared he was.
Mm.
And he writes this in the afterword, right? About how scared he was, how he didn't know how it was going to end up, how angry he was about how I was being treated, and how he really didn't know what to do. But he knew that if I stayed the way I was, it was going to be a very hard life for me. So he had to figure out a way to teach me, self-esteem is earned, not given. How am I going to do that to a kid who's not going to have friends, not going to be good at school, not going to be good at athletics? Well, how about push-ups? I'm going to have to teach him how the social and emotional fabric of people work, like from a learned skill perspective. And that's where the watch tap story came. If we would go out to lunch with one of his friends or something, and I'd start peppering them with questions, and he'd tap his watch.
Mm.
That was my signal to stop talking. And then later we'd post game it. Why did you interrupt there? What were you thinking? What could you have said that would have been what the other person was interested in?
Had you, I'm curious. You say I mean, yeah, the afterward says he was scared. Doesn't necessarily know precisely what to do. But you ask him what resources he was using to figure this out, or was he just winging it? I mean, because
he was winging it.
Back then, there wasn't much in the way of how to
Yeah.
address any of this stuff.
No, there wasn't. And when we started working on Born Lucky, a number of publishers started talking to us about that. This needs to be an autism how-to book. How to fix your kid, how to cure your kid, how to do this, how to do that. And I said, absolutely not. I said, this isn't a how-to book. This is a book about a father and a son. This is a father-son love story. And this is just our story. And I think it's why it's touched such a nerve. I'm very, really humbled that so many people have bought it. But what is really meaningful to me is how many people have emailed me and say, now I feel like I'm not alone. And it's not just parents of kids on the autism spectrum. It's parents of kids with ADHD or with anxiety or who are getting bullied at school or a mother of a kid who has a peanut allergy. All saying, this pushed me to be more for my kid and to make my kid be more. The peanut allergy stories, I think, is a great one because this mother has 2 kids. And I've known her tangentially in DC. Very successful family, very successful kids. Both varsity athletes at an Ivy League university, both model good looking. And she comes up to me and she goes, your book really spoke to me. And I was like, really? Like your kids? And she goes, yeah. She goes, my son, when he was 3 years old, had a peanut allergy. and I was told that I had to take away peanuts from every classroom he's going to be in, every sports field. Like he must be in a bubble to protect him from peanuts. And this is the mother talking. She said, I realized he wasn't going to have a chance at a normal life because he was going to be the peanut kid in the, in the bubble wrap. So I went about trying to desensitize him to peanuts. She took him to 4 or 5 doctors, all of whom said, you're going to kill your kid. Finally found one who was willing to try and help her, desensitized her son to peanuts. Now a varsity athlete in an Ivy League school. Would have never happened because of, if he had had the peanut allergy. And now in ROTC would have never happened if he had had the peanut allergy.
Yeah, that peanut allergy thing is a pretty good metaphor or analog for all of the other, the choice that parents or even the individual makes about whether to, I guess, accept or succumb to whatever's the issue or plow through it or deal with it or get stronger, whatever. We in the late 80s, early 90s, we created this problem. There were a couple of kids that were having some issues with it, and everybody freaked out about it, and the rate of peanut allergy skyrocketed over the next 15 years to be, similar to what you're talking about. And the reality of life is, and nobody knows this, more than you, but the weight doesn't get lighter; you get stronger. That's how everything works. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like literally everything in life works exactly like that. So it's such a profound thing to hear how in tune with that your dad was in a time when people weren't thinking or talking about any of this. There was no Born Lucky published in 85 or whatever when you were in elementary school or whenever that started.
No, and it's one of the reasons we wanted to put the book out there is because, as I said, Dad never told anybody about this. This was as private and as personal and as raw as you can imagine. When you read the book, you realize sort of putting out the most awful times of my life. And we really wrestled with it. And as we were writing it, every time we would get to a story and I'd be interviewing my dad, he'd go, oh, wait a second. Do we really want to talk about that right now? I don't know if we should put that in. I said, this ain't going to work. I said, here's what we're going to do. We're going to write the book with as raw and as emotional and as sort of profound of stories as we can do. And if you don't like it, at the end, we won't turn it into HarperCollins. So he kind of thought about it. He said, okay, so we write the book and he reads it and he goes, I don't know about this. Like, this is really some deep and personal stuff. I said, I understand that, Dad. I said, let me turn this around for you. I said, if when you were in that conference room for that psychologist who said there's so much going on with him, there's so much wrong, he's got all these problems, and basically there's no hope. If instead she had said to you, here's Born Lucky, this is a story of a father and a son, what would you have done? And he said, I would have read it every week because it would have shown me the power of a father. And I said, well, I think that's your answer.
Yeah.
And it's important, it's not just about, this is not how to turn your autistic kid into a news anchor, right? There was a father of a kid who was profoundly autistic, nonverbal, lives in a group home, on and on and on. And the father was reading the reports from the group home and realized that his son really loved to go splash around in the pool. It was like pool day, 3 days a week. They go to a rec center. So he said, I want to teach my kid how to swim. And they said, we don't think that's a good idea. He said, no, we're going to teach my kid how to swim. Not only taught him how to swim, but he now swims 1.5 miles every morning, totally changed physically, totally happier, all of a sudden more communicative, smiles every morning when he gets up and puts on his swimsuit. Totally changed the kid's life, all because the father told the experts, no, my kid can be more.
Yeah, that's one of the interesting things about autism. You mentioned it before, and there's a commonality with ADD, ADHD as well, but this hyper-focus or prolonged attention to something and it's what produces, like the musical or artistic virtuosos. They're so locked in, and they just see it. And that's probably, it's hard to contextualize for people that just go on about a typical life, but that's all the things that you do that are satisfying during your day. That's what that is for them. You know what I mean? And it might look odd to us. It might look like they're ignoring the world or they're not getting what they want out of the world. But clearly, this kid that you're describing, that's what needed to happen for him.
Yeah, and he's, it just again, I think it's just such a story about how every parent has that power to help their kid be more and to fulfill their full potential in a way that the experts don't always talk about and don't always see.
This episode is brought to you by Cape. Traditional carriers like AT&T, Verizon, and T-Mobile have made headlines again and again for data breaches and surveillance scandals. These companies are often ISP conglomerates whose business models go beyond providing you with connectivity to actively collecting and selling your personal data to ad networks and data brokers, and that's why you're getting weird phone calls and emails all the time. Well, many people use tools like VPNs, as do I, encrypted messenger apps, private browsers, etc., to protect themselves, but app-based solutions can't fix vulnerabilities at the network level. Once the data transmits over the line, then you lose some control over it. And this is where Cape comes in. Founded in 2022 by experts in telecom, cybersecurity, and national security, Cape is a secure mobile carrier providing premium cellular service just like AT&T or Verizon, but designed with privacy and security as its first principle. It has all sorts of features like minimal data collection, SIM swap protection, enhanced signaling protection, which is systems are designed for operability, not security. These are designed for security. Encrypted voicemail protects a lot of your sensitive info, and then private payment. Card info is tokenized, and you don't have to provide additional info. So Cape is an MVNO, which means we lease access to major carrier infrastructure, just like Mint Mobile, just like T-Mobile's infrastructure. They lease T-Mobile's infrastructure. However, most American MVNOs are quote-unquote light MVNOs. This means that while the MVNO may present as a different company, the underlying mobile core and subscriber SIMs are still from the underlying carrier, which means you are subject to whatever infrastructure problems that T-Mobile or whomever else has. Cape is a heavy MVNO. This means that while we also lease access to physical infrastructure from other carriers, we actually own our own mobile core and provision our own SIMs. Cape is the only privacy-focused carrier in the country that owns and operates its own mobile core. No other carrier provides this set of capabilities. They take security seriously. They partner with Proton, the email service that you've probably heard of, Proton Mail, EFF. They partner with Graphene, which we use for payment processing already. So if this all sounds good to you and you want to protect yourself against security breaches, go to cape.co/citizen and use the code CITIZEN33 for 33% off Cape for 6 months. Again, that's cape, cape.co/citizen. Use the code CITIZEN33 for 33% off Cape for 6 months. Yeah. What do you think? What are some of the lessons, I guess, that you learned through this process that are in the book that apply to, just a kid that's having a hard time,
Just
not
life.
necessarily
Yeah,
autistic or
I think it's a
whatever?
great point. Adversity is your friend. Embrace the suck. You can't kill me. Whatever term, there's been a bazillion books like that. I don't think anybody's written one about childhood, in the way Born Lucky is, but that all is very real. And I think about when in Born Lucky, right? I'd been asked to leave Fox News because of the 2020 election. I was the only anchor who publicly questioned Trump's claims and publicly questioned his spokespeople. I almost died of COVID. I'd been in the hospital for a week. I had ended a long-term relationship and was now single and didn't have a place to live. So all in the span of a month that happened, and I ended up down in my parents' guest bedroom in Florida, feeling sorry for myself in the beginning of 2021. And my dad came into my room one night, maybe we were in the living room, and he said, "You're feeling pretty sorry for yourself, aren't you?" I said, "Yeah, I'm pretty low." And he said, "I know." He said, "But every day in 8th grade, you got up and you went back to school. Every day. Even after, in front of the entire class, an art teacher who didn't think I was Picasso gets up there and he says, 'Vittert, if my dog was as ugly as you, I'd shave its ass and make it walk backwards.'" In front of the whole school.
Yeah.
So with that, I said, "You know what?" He said, "If you can get through that, you can go to school the next day, you can get up and keep fighting here." And that was true, right? And what my dad didn't tell me was that middle school at the time was great training for a Washington newsroom, but you're supposed to smile at that.
Yeah, that's kind of a stoic like Marcus Aurelius thing, right? It's everything
When,
he draws this binary. It's like everything is either survivable or he says endurable, I think, endurable or not endurable, right? And the fact that you have endured so far shows that the things you faced are endurable. So if you're facing those same things again, you know, intellectually
Right.
speaking, you know that they are endurable. So the choice is yours.
Right. Yeah. And I think that was really important. And I think I think character is destiny, which my dad laid out. I think that every kid can be more, right? And, I had a mother come up to me a couple of days ago. Her daughter was getting bullied really badly. And her daughter's, whatever you would call normal, right? Nice girl, eighth grade, no diagnoses, just a nice girl, but really having a hard time in school. And she said, I kept trying to make things easier for her. I kept trying to say, okay, you don't have to do this and you don't have to do that, and on and on and on. And she said, and I read the book and I realized that really what I needed to say is we're going to do hard things together. We're gonna, you're gonna go to school. We're gonna try to have friends over. We're gonna try to do all these things to help you. And that I think is that message of Born Lucky. And I think the other thing for kids who are having a hard time is the idea it gets better, right? I always say I never liked anybody who liked middle school, or I never liked anybody who liked high school, because the values there are so screwed up that if you liked it, it says bad things about you. And I would argue, I never like anybody, or I often say I never like anybody who likes Washington, D.C., because the values here are so screwed up and so difficult.
Yeah, it's interesting. I like that idea. We're going to do hard things together. I mean, that is just a very, it's something that leaders should do. Like you never ask. In the mill, I was an infantry sergeant. You never, in the 82nd Airborne, you never ask your men to do something you won't do, and
Right.
you always lead by example as well. I mean, one of the phrases we use is "leaders eat last." Like you make sure that everyone's taken care of before you sit down. You said character is destiny. Can you explain that?
Sure. In Born Lucky, you have to really understand where my dad came from to understand the book. And so the two things that he taught me were non-negotiable for him early on was character and hard work. So where does that come from? It comes from his dad. And when my dad was 16 years old, he was getting ready for a date one night. He was upstairs in his bathroom shaving, and his brother walked in, who was much older, about 10 years old. My dad says, "What are you doing here?" He was, I think, married at the time. And my dad's brother told him that his father had died. Most profound moment in his life. And also, at that point, his mother was having some pretty serious issues, so she was pretty much out of the picture. And he ended up going down with his brother that night to the family office and opened the family safe. And in the safe was a letter from my grandfather to my dad and to his other son, my uncle, saying that a man is defined not by his bank account or awards on a shelf or accolades, but by his character. And so that was the foundation sort of how dad began teaching me to have self-esteem and pride in who I was as a person, because you could have pride in your character.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I'm sure that from your perspective now as a news anchor, journalist, however you want to categorize that, you can map this on to broader society, right? Like the idea. I mean, G.K. Chesterton said that men didn't love Rome because she was great. Rome was great because the men had loved her, right? And he kind of implies that a national pride. With that national pride comes some level of attention and effort that makes things better, right?
Yeah, you're far more philosophical than I am, with a far greater depth of knowledge of this stuff than I am. So I feel a little out of my depth here, but it makes sense, and I think that the lessons of Born Lucky are these very intimate, individual father-son lessons, right? And yes, does good character and pride apply individually and collectively? Sure. And it's, I think it's why good people attract good people. And, great people want to be around other great people, and people of low character tend to want to be around each other. So it maps to the larger society, I guess, in the way you lay out.
Okay. What about, I want to go back for a second. Lucky, where does this come from?
Oh, so the reason the title is Born Lucky is because when I was born, the doctor who delivered me named me. 1982, uh, time of sort of a lot of medical research that it was quite in vogue to have a natural birth, and that doctors were saying women should have C-sections because it was more convenient, on and on and on. So my mom's 35, high risk pregnancy. The doctor could tell on the ultrasound I was breech. I was upside down. Said to my mom, I have a bad feeling about this. I think you should have a C-section. My mom thought about it and said, you know, if I'm not going to take my doctor's advice, I should get a new doctor, not take his advice. It was advice that later saved my life a couple times in the Middle East. But she's now in the delivery room. My dad's there. And we interviewed my parents about this pretty extensively because obviously I didn't remember it. But my mom and dad are there. And so in Born Lucky, there's like the blue sheet where my mom and dad are here, and then I'm being delivered on the other side of the sheet. And all of a sudden the nurse goes, "Oh my God." And the doctor goes, "Oh my God, this is a lucky baby." A lucky baby. And my mom's hand just like clenches down on my dad's, and my dad goes, "Everything okay?" And the doctor goes, "Yeah, give us a minute." And then he goes, "Oh my God, this is the luckiest baby we've ever seen." So my dad goes, "Is everything okay?" And the doctor goes, "Yeah, everything's fine. We're good." And so I'm born, and I'm like, a happy little baby and whatever. So now I'm up the next day in the little maternity ward with my mom in the room, and there's a whiteboard outside the room. And it says like, Carol Vittert, my mom's name, Leland Vittert, my name, and the last time I pooped and how much I weighed, whatever
Yeah,
it is.
yeah.
So the doctor comes up with a Sharpie and crosses out Leland and said, "Call this kid Lucky." So from when I was born to when I was 18, I would introduce myself to anybody I met as Lucky Vittert.
Interesting. And then tell me about this phrase that I see, lucky has to want it. What does that mean?
Well, this was something that my dad was told by the one person who diagnosed me, and then also that he really pushed on me, which was, if you want to be better, if you want to be more, you have to want it, right? And that's true of anything in life, but normally we think about it later in life that of drive and what it takes to, achieve great things. It was hard for my dad because he had to figure out how to teach a 5-year-old that you have to want it, right? Like you're a 5-year-old who's like, why is this so hard for me? Why do I have to want to get better? Why do I have to want to go to school every day? Like that was the hard part for him of trying to teach me that I had to want to be more and be better. How to teach self-esteem, is earned, not given. And that's where the push-ups came from, which was, it's like, okay, what can a 5-year-old do? Well, you can do push-ups. So I started doing, 200 push-ups a day, 5 days a week. And in return, 3 months later, I would go to Disney World with my mom or something. But it was all about trying to teach me that, you could accomplish things, and that hard work meant you could accomplish things, which set me up later for the hard work of changing myself and discipline and becoming who I am now.
And this has, aside from just helping you deal with the issues that you were dealing with, now your pathway. I mean, anybody that's followed your career or can go back and look at your career sees that it's influenced a lot of the stuff you've done. I mean, you started out in weekend anchoring and stuff, but then you're covering the Freddie Gray riots in Baltimore. You're in the Arab Spring, also on the ground there at the same time when Lara Logan gets kidnapped and stuff like that. I mean, it was not the best time to be in a place.
No.
You're in Ukraine during the beginning of a color revolution in 2014. You've been around the block a little bit and done some things that are, some people might say questionable. Let's say that. I can't speak to that myself because I went to war, so this is not what the fuck am I going to say? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I did Libya for the Libyan, for the Libyan Revolution and a couple of Gaza wars. There was this moment when I was in college that I really wanted to go into the CIA, and I got all the way through the pipeline and made a decision at the very end not to, because I was so worried that if I got grabbed overseas, they had you read all these books about the agency and everything else. And one of them was about this thing called the Book of Honor, which was the Wall of Honor at Langley that had the stars of every intelligence officer killed overseas. And one of the first couple stars was a guy who was running a net in China when Mao took over and got grabbed and was held for 20 years. And once a year, his mother could come visit him through Hong Kong. And I'm sitting there thinking, if I go to war as a soldier and I get killed, it happens, but that's a different situation. If I go to the agency, my dad and I talk 2 or 3 times a day. I am still his best friend, and he's mine. If I got grabbed and they knew I was somewhere overseas, it would really destroy them. And so I said to the agency, I said, I just can't do this. I can't. It's too selfish of me to want this adventure and want to do this and have my parents worry, especially after everything that they had done. And at that point, I really understood some of what they had done. Mm-hmm. So I dropped on request out of the agency pipeline and decided to do something far safer, which was go be a foreign correspondent.
Yeah. In Gaza and Libya and Egypt and et cetera.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
Yeah, it's totally. I mean, what 22-year-old doesn't have that thought out?
Oh my God. It's pretty funny, to be honest. And I'm curious about that, about, being a journalist. There's not a lot of people that play it by the book, I guess. We have a lot of sophists and opinionists these days. I'm not asking you to comment on that, but you've clearly done a really good job of avoiding it. And it's not like you don't, like, everybody's got their personal opinions, but obviously myself included, but there's this responsibility that I think people who deliver news have to try to maintain as much neutrality as possible. Even if they're not specifically neutral, deliver information and not sophistry, not, logical fallacies, not conclusions and stuff like that. George Carlin used to talk about this. He was like, I see the headline, brutal dictator killed, and it makes me cringe. Just say dictator killed, tell me what he did, and I'll decide if he's brutal, right? And I think there aren't a whole lot of people, frankly, doing a great job of that these days, especially. We live in a society where it's just like, we're just back to sophistry. I mean, the reason that Aristotle wrote Organon in the first place in Athens 2,300 years ago is present once again. It's just a lot of emotional reasoning and stuff like that. And obviously, you're not going to be somebody who emotionally reasons too much because of the autism thing. That's just not how it works necessarily. But you've also done a really good job. And I wonder, the condition and your dad and how he prepared you for it, how has that affected the way that you do your job?
Well, it's a very fair question, but one I don't know the answer to because I'm just me, right?
Sure, yeah.
Like, I don't know what it's like to not have autism or how to be, what would it be like if you were different? And somebody asked me, what's it like to date with autism? I don't know. I don't know what it's like to date without autism, so I can't compare and contrast. The idea of being true to an idea, right? Or, sort of pledging allegiance to this concept of being a journalist versus being an opinion guy is a real one, right? And obviously it ended up costing me a job at Fox News. Fine. That's just the way the cookie crumbles. Obviously things have worked out well. I would have never met my wife. I would have never had this great opportunity at Newsnation, on and on and on. So that's all fine. But, I always say journalists make lousy media critics. I never thought that having bias was having an opinion, because as you point out, we all have opinions. If you have a pulse, you have an opinion. To me, bias was excluding an opinion, right? Or having disdain for an opinion. And that is where I think we're in this reflexive back and forth of what one side does must be bad because that side does it, and what one side does must be good because it's my side who's doing it. And it doesn't really matter which side you're on. That's the 35-yard lines and out in American politics right now. I think, for me at least, in the middle, there's this group of people that probably is the majority of Americans, because if you just think about a bell-shaped curve, the majority are in the middle, who really want to hear the ideas of both sides questioned and challenged. And that, to me, is what our really highest calling as journalists is not to pass moral judgment on one side or the other, but to aggressively question both sides. And then, to your point, not say he's a brutal dictator, but by showing you what he's done, you decide he's a brutal dictator.
Right.
And then we can all move on.
Yeah, and you've done your work not just as somebody to provide information, but you've also forced people to think, which is never a bad thing.
You're nice to say that. Whatever I can do, I'm happy that people watch and listen and trust me. And it's a fight every day. You know this.
Yeah.
To get people to believe you, because it's so hard. It's so hard to earn people's trust. It's so easy to lose it. And that's something I really think about every day. But if I might, because I'm a TV anchor and therefore at least slightly narcissistic, I think it's the reason we're the only show on cable that's growing, or the only network on cable that's growing. The Newsnation is growing every month, because people in the center are finding us and they're saying, "Wow, I really like this." And I may not agree with them all the time, but that's kind of the idea. I like that he's willing to challenge both sides.
Yeah, for sure. There's Bati is a good friend of mine.
Love Bati.
Yeah. Chris is, he people get captured with things from time to time in workplaces. He seems like he's pivoting back towards it as well. And I think what your network is doing that other networks aren't is attacking the law of the excluded middle. I don't know if it's a logical fallacy you can read about in the Sixth Organ on Work, but it's a thing is either A or it is B. There's no in the middle of that, and there's nothing outside of that. It has to be this thing or that thing, and it's a fact. It's not true, right? It's just simply not true. But the binary nature of tribal politics is it drives you into this line of thinking, and especially when you feel like you're under attack or your beliefs are under attack, you retreat to this stuff. But it's wrong. It's like not morally wrong. It's incorrect, and the journalist plays a very big role in as a counterweight or a ballast or whatever you want to call it, to make sure that people are like, wait a minute, is what I'm thinking right as well? Or giving people the capability, I suppose, and the information to know when their side or the other side is presenting a false choice or presenting sophistry, like something that sounds good. It sounds really good. What you're saying sounds good, but is it actual syllogism? Is it actually true? You know what I mean? Or is it just rhetoric? And it's fine. Rhetoric is fine, by the way. There's nothing wrong with that. Being compelling and being able to get your message across is important. If you have good information and a bad delivery, you're Ron DeSantis and you don't get elected president, because people don't like the way you look on camera, which is a silly thing, but it is a thing indeed. So, both of those things are necessary.
I don't think that was DeSantis' only problem, but okay.
Well, yeah, there's the popularity of Trump was a little bit overwhelming for him as well, I think. But and then
I think there was also, I don't do a lot of analysis, but I do a lot of reporting. When people saw Ron DeSantis, they didn't think he cared about people like them. We always in political journalism, if you go back, that the single best deciding factor about who's going to get elected in any election is the poll question: do they care about people like me? And Ron DeSantis, nobody thought, he cared about people like them.
Why do you think that is?
This is my conclusion after covering, presidential politics since 2008, since the election then, sometimes as a local anchor. Obviously, I was overseas for the 2012 election and then back and covered 2016, 2020, and 2024. The American people are really smart. They're really smart. And they have an innate understanding of people and of who they want to have lead them. And that's a really hard, it's a very hard thing to come through. And everyone always says the camera adds 10 pounds. And I always say, no, I think the camera just exposes everything that's there, right? It is the single best lie detector that has ever existed on Earth. And, if you think about the politicians that have done really well, again, this is sort of just, analysis based on what I've watched. They're the ones who are absolutely identical on camera as they are off camera. And Trump is the exact same guy on camera as he is off camera. Bill O'Reilly, exact same guy as he is on camera, off camera. I think that
Clinton,
that's
Bill
true
Clinton,
of Barack Obama.
Bill Clinton's like that too, yeah.
And by the way, that's true of George W. Bush. You watch George W. Bush and you thought he was, a fraternity president. Guess what? That's what he was.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You know, the whole thing about, trying to be authentic by cursing and, saying, no, the whole thing about authenticity is just being you. And there's actually a whole chapter in Born Lucky, sort of, everybody, I understand why, is focused on my childhood, which is by far the most interesting part. But, the best piece of advice I ever got from a TV executive was learn to be you. And once you figure out how to be you, I can make you better. But you can't be good on TV or in podcasting or anything unless you're comfortable being you on camera.
That's a really good piece of advice.
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah.
Very good.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I like that. Yeah, it's authenticity matters to people, obviously. I mean,
Yeah.
there's so much. We're pattern seeking, as I mentioned before. That's like it's innate to us. That's how evolution designed us to look for threats and benefits. You know what I mean? And however you want to feel about this politically or socially or morally or whatever, we tend to attract, or we tend to look towards things that look like us, not necessarily physically, right? But
Yeah.
in the totality of our ability to perceive sensory data, whether it's physical appearance or social activity or whatever it is, we trend towards things that are like us because that's what feels safe, right? And that's a good analysis that, you can, if you're looking to, I wouldn't give advice to a bad actor to try to trick people this way, but if you're having issues connected with people and you think you have a good message, that's a really good piece of advice. Just be as much of yourself as you possibly can, and then find the flaws after the fact, right? And try to correct those, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that's all there.
Let me ask you this about, now that you're an adult, you've written this book, so you've definitely, I'm sure you've thought about it plenty over the years, but you've really gotten into it now. You've analyzed your own life essentially, and your father's contribution and all the other things that have happened over the years. If you could go back and tell yourself at 5, 7, 8, 10, 12, whatever years old, when you were struggling, anything, what would you tell yourself at the time?
I would basically say your dad's right? That, that middle school isn't real life. High school isn't real life. It gets better, and that the hard work will pay off. And I think, the other part that I think that's not told enough, in today's world, I guess it's said a lot that, we have to modify everything, we have to modify the world for the kid. And I think, what I would tell myself as a kid is work absolutely as hard as you can to learn the social and emotional fabric to the best of your ability. And that will really pay enormous dividends later. And I point out, I'm still learning. It's still an everyday discipline. It's still that. But when you tell kids, hey, you're perfect the way you are, you don't have to change a thing. Well, you're doing them an enormous disservice, because there's so much, I tell the story, if that father had said to the kid who was nonverbal and profoundly autistic and in a group home, what, I'm just so proud of you for splashing around in the water. You just keep splashing. Just keep splashing. That's what makes you happy. Just keep splashing. The kid would never have started swimming 1.5 miles every day. He wouldn't have started swimming a lap. So there's this balance between just sort of accepting everybody where they're at. And I'm just so fortunate that my dad, who certainly had the ability and the resources and everything else to just sort of change the world for me, never allowed me to accept myself as just who I am. It's always, can you be more?
Yeah.
And that was a really important thing for him and for me, obviously.
My friend Andy Frisella, he's the owner of First Form, if you've ever heard of that, another very large St. Louis-based company, actually. And he says that personal excellence is the ultimate rebellion. And I think, from the American spirit, this idea that individual liberty and personal entrepreneurship are the ultimate inoculation against tyrannical bullshit, it's a very profound statement. You know what I mean? People will say things like, we unleashed the power of the individual and it created a bulwark against tyranny. And I think that's very true. And I think it could be true in your own life as well. I mean, you talk about the value system in high school sucks. Obviously, there's a lot of social dynamics going on there, and it's not real life. I mean, it's silly. There's no like real meritocracy in that situation. There's a lot of
Yeah.
groupthink, and there's a lot of bandwagon fallacy going on there and stuff like that. Just nonsense. But when you get into the real world, everybody, and I'm not going to get too into the like game theory and math and shit like that, but Nash's equilibrium theory sounds really communist to me, frankly. Your sister would probably have something to say about that. I don't know what it would be, but she's a very bright mathematician.
She's the smarter one. You should have her on. You'll get a lot more out of it.
I don't know if I could hang with MIT.
I always make the joke that the apples fell from the tree and my apple rolled down to the drainage ditch and her apple stayed up in the orchard, which is true. My sister's studying, but yeah, game theory for her is like cocktail hour, and for me it's like, okay, I got to go back to my econ classes and brush up. But yeah, I think that we're at some point when you are in this process of trying to change the human condition doesn't change, right? And it's why what you brought up from Rome and Aristotle and others, these are eternal truths. And I think Born Lucky is just sort of putting those in a story, not of surviving, buds as a Navy SEAL, or not as, insert great accomplishment here, building some big business like Sam Walton did of Walmart. One of my favorite books is Walton's autobiography, Made in America. But it's this is eternal truth through the eyes of an 8-year-old.
And it's again, looking through the lens like that, it doesn't have to be the specific situation you're in to pull wisdom out of it. You know what I mean? I mean,
Right.
even though you experienced it, I'm sure going through this process, writing this book, talking to your father, and all this other stuff, probably made you quite a bit more capable of a thinker. Just having got like, oh, I see what, like, it's one thing to get the benefit of it. It's another thing to understand what the benefit was and being able to apply it in other parts of your life. And hopefully everyone will go read this book and get the same, because I think there are other books as well that are like this, but this one in particular for people that, because it is a very common situation to have, to be a child with a parent. Not necessarily to go through this stuff you did, but certainly those two things are common for people, so they can feel comfortable reading about this, seeing struggle, seeing the overcoming part, seeing the analysis of it, and then saying, hey, here's how I can apply these lessons to my kid or to the people that I work with, if I'm a manager or whatever. There's a lot of wisdom there. So I appreciate you coming on today. Tell everybody where they can find the book and where they can find you.
No, thank you. Thanks for the time and for your audience to think that they'd be interested in this. Born Lucky's out now. You get it at Amazon, anywhere you can get a book. Thankfully, we're back in print. We sort of didn't really realize how many people were going to be taken by this story, so we sold out 2 or 3 times. But we've got enough books now. So Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever you get a book, Born Lucky's the book. And then at Leland Vittert, it's pretty easy. And as I said, I think the most meaningful part about this has been the social media comments and the reviews and the emails, and I send all of them to my dad, because it, I think, is really proof of, not only did his sacrifice and his dedication save me and what it did for me, but it can do so much for so many others.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. And, again, one of the things that I like to tell people is if you can turn your pain and suffering into empathy for others, you can save your life and theirs. So
Great point.
I really appreciate the fact that you wrote this and coming on the show today. Everybody go check out the book, Born Lucky, A Dedicated Father, A Grateful Son, and My Journey with Autism by Leland Vittert. And check out Newsnation. And
Thank you.
Yeah, and everything else
9
that's going
p.m.
on.
9 p.m. Eastern. I'll see you there every night.
All right. Well, thanks again for coming today. We really appreciate your time.
Good talking to you.
Yes, sir. And thank you all for listening. This has been Citizen.